you agree? You're streaming? Oh, yeah, you're streaming.
I stream it, bro. Alright, hold on. Hold on. I'm looking at these F slurs here. They make me sick.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Hold on. God. Oh my god!
Yeah, dude.
Whoa! Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You
Okay.
sound like that's what you sound like.
Can
Wesker's
you
out
be
of here.
nice? My throat hurts so much and it's been like 2 weeks.
No.
My god, Cody Code DJing. Fucking. Okay.
What?
Alright. I don't know. I'm on Twitter. I need to not be on Twitter. Hold on. Let me pull my blankie up. Let me pull my blankie.
Okay, I will be looking at gay porn
Yeah, I figure.
for reference. Whole.
Don't share your screen because you'll get me
I'm
banned
not.
from
I'm not.
YouTube.
I'm not. I'm not.
You'll get me banned from YouTube.
No, I'm not.
Alright. I'm gonna start and then immediately get called down, but that's fine.
Are you sure? Do you want to wait?
No, I don't want to wait. I never want to wait for this. Let me get to the page. And drink water. Alright, are you ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Let me take my glasses off. The sword, wait, chapter 25, upon the grand avenue of divine might, a fleeting glimpse of beauty. The sword was thrust, penetrating the heart of the demon, and left it dead on the ground. By heaven's blessings, malevolence is slain and evil is subdued. On either side of the grand avenue of divine might, cheers erupted like an ocean current, coming in wave after wave, each one cresting higher than the last. In the courtyard that stretched before the scarlet red gates of the palace, the two cultivators who played the roles of god and demon bowed to the surrounding crowds and stepped down, standing off to the side. The martial match that opened the show heightened the excitement in the city. Not only were the streets packed, elbow to elbow, even the rooftops were full of brave climbers, clapping, hollering, flailing. The crowds went wild. A celebration of this magnitude was truly brimming and bustling with energy. In the history of the kingdom of Shenle, if any festival of Shangyuan was to be described thus, it had to be the one happening today. Upon the towering platform, row after row of finely dressed nobles and royals overlooked the crowd, all wearing courteous smiles on their faces. Within the palace, a line of hundreds waited silently. When the bell chimed, the state preceptor stroked his non existent beard and began to roll call. This guy, the state preceptor, the way they describe him is such like an old man, but he's actually a twink, like the way he's drawn. It's crazy. I have to send you art
Like
later.
how?
It's so funny. Because, like, the first time I read it, I thought he was, like, this old guy with a beard, but he's literally, like, a pretty boy. Okay. Stroked his non existent beard, began to roll call. Path opening warriors, present. Jade maidens, present. Musicians, present. Cavalry, present. Demon, present. The god pleasing martial warrior, no one answered. The state preceptor frowned as he noticed the complication and turned his head. The god pleasing martial warrior, where's the crown prince? Still, no one responded. The one who had answered to demon paused before he removed the monstrous mask, revealing a delicate, fair face. This youth appeared to be about 16 or 17. His skin and lips were both light in color, fresh and neat, and he bore a pair of bright, shimmering eyes as black as obsidian. His hair was soft and silky, and a few loose strands lightly littered his forehead and cheeks. He looked quiet and obedient in contrast to the monstrous demon mask in his hand. He replied quietly, His Highness the Crown Prince has left. The state preceptor almost fainted, but for the sake of this grand occasion he couldn't faint, so he held on and instead yelled with an angry exasperation, What? He left? When did His Highness leave? The ceremonial parade is about to leave the palace gates. When the grand stage is revealed and there's only a demon but no god, my old bones won't be able to swim out of all the spit that'll come flying at me. Mu Ching, why didn't you stop him? Mu Ching hung his head. When His Highness left, he told me to pass on the message not to worry and that everything can proceed as planned. He will return promptly. The state preceptor was in hysterics from anxiety. How can I not worry? What do you mean promptly? What is promptly? What if he doesn't make it? Outside the palace gates, the citizens, who had been waiting since early morning, were losing patience and were noisily demanding for the event to start. A cultivator came rushing forward. My lord, state preceptor, the queen sent a message inquiring why the parade hasn't started. The fortuitous hour is fast approaching. If we don't leave now, we'll miss it. At those words, the state preceptor desperately prayed that a rebel army would suddenly invade and disrupt the Shangyuan parade completely. Why did this headache have to happen right at the most crucial moment? If the troublemaker were anyone else, he would have flown into a rage already. No one would consider it strange. No one would consider it a strange urge if he brandished a sword with intent to kill. But this troublemaker just happened to be his very, very favorite, most precious disciple and the very, very distinguished, most precious son of another. He couldn't beat him, he couldn't yell at him, and he most definitely couldn't kill him. Rather than kill him, he'd more likely kill himself. Just then, someone ran across the palace's black path and rushed inside, shouting, "Lord State Preceptor, why hasn't the parade started? The hour is about to pass and everyone outside is on edge." The one who'd arrived was also a young man of 16 or 17. His build was upright and tall, his skin the color of wheat, and on his back he carried a long black bow and a snow-white quiver. His lips were pressed tight, his brows knit. Even at such a young age, his eyes were determined. The moment the state preceptor saw him, he grabbed him. "Feng Xin, where's that highness of yours?" Feng Xin was taken aback, but understanding instantly dawned, and anger filled his eyes, and he turned his gaze to Mu Ching. As for Mu Ching, he had already put his demon mask back on without a word, his expression now unseen. Feng Xin said gravely, "There's no time to explain. Please start the parade immediately. His Highness the Crown Prince will not disappoint you, sir." There was no other way. Bringing out a grand stage without the god-pleasing martial warrior was death. Delaying the procession and missing the fortuitous hour was also death. Despairingly, the state preceptor waved his hand. "Start the music. Depart." Upon receiving the command, the flutes and strings started to play, and the hundreds of royal warriors at the front of the procession roared in chorus to begin their march and lead the massive, impressive parade. They had departed. The warriors at the front symbolized the thorny paths of the mortal world. Immediately following were the virgin girls meticulously selected from thousands of applicants, demure and beautiful. With baskets in their hands, they scattered flowers in the air like the celestial maidens they played, paving the path with blossoms and filling it with fragrance to signify enduring and unsullied virtue. The musicians rode in carriages of gold. The moment the procession left the palace gates, the crowds were amazed and astonished, fighting to catch the flowers. However, no matter how magnificent, how extravagant, how grand, this was only the warm-up act. The grand float, a glorious stage, was about to emerge. 16 white stallions, adorned with gold, pulled the grand stage from behind the palace gates, slowly bringing it before the eyes of millions. On the stage was a black-clad demon with a monstrous mask on his face and a 9-foot-long saber in his hands. Gravely, he shifted to a fighting stance. The state preceptor was tense like a taut string, hoping for a miracle. Yet no miracles occurred. The crowd broke into chatter. Above, on the high platform, the royals and nobles frowned, exchanging wondering looks at each other. What's going on? Why is the god-pleasing martial warrior not on stage? Has His Highness the Crown Prince not arrived yet? Where's Lian Gege? At the center of the tall platform sat a dignified, handsome man and a fair-skinned, amiable, gracious noblewoman. They were the king and queen of the kingdom of Shenle. Not seeing the one who should be there, the queen gave the king a worried look. The king took hold of her hand and used his gaze to comfort, telling her not to worry and to watch and see what would happen. "Hi, Scout, is it dinner?" "Alright, I gotta go eat dinner."
Okay.
I'll be back. Hello.
Hello.
Did you miss
I
me?
think sure. Um, I think I'm trying to use this 3D modeler and it's a little insane.
What do you think?
That's that I'm trying to use this 3D modeler and it's a little insane.
Okay. Can I keep reading?
Yeah, sure.
Yippee! I'm gonna start over the paragraph. At the center of the tall platform sat a dignified, handsome man and a fair-skinned, amiable, gracious noblewoman. They were the king and queen of the kingdom of Shenle. Not seeing the one who should be there, the queen gave the king a worried look. The king took hold of her hand and used his gaze to comfort, telling her not to worry and to watch and see what would happen. The crowds below, however, had no one to comfort them, and their cries grew louder, so much so that the noise could almost raise the rooftops. The state preceptor was tense like a taut string, hoping for a miracle. Yet no miracles occurred. The crowd broke into chatter. Above, on the high platform, the royals and nobles frowned, exchanging wondering looks at each other. What's going on? Why is the god-pleasing martial warrior not on stage? Has His Highness the Crown Prince not arrived yet? Where's the Wait, I already read that. The state preceptor could only blame himself for not having the courage to kill himself right then and there.
Oh,
Yet on stage, Mu Ching was quite calm. Even without his opponent, he remained meticulous, taking care of his own stage directions. Clang, he hurled his heavy saber down into the stage, standing it upright before him. Pantomiming an act of chilling slaughter, the black-clad youth impressively ended the opening act as the demon. By face and by form, Mu Ching was delicate and elegant like a gentle scholar, and yet he still swung an impossibly heavy 3-meter saber as if it were feather light in his hands, as if it were weightless. Another group of cultivators, playing the roles of demon vanquishers, leapt onto the stage one by one they were instantly defeated and chased off the stage. That saber danced skillfully and made the performance quite exciting to watch, so some in the crowds cheered for him, except the people didn't come to watch the demon causing havoc, so after that act, there were more complaints. Where's the god-pleasing martial warrior? Where's His Highness the Crown Prince? We want to see His Highness playing the Heavenly Emperor. Defeat the evil. Upon the towering platform, a furious voice shouted, "Where's my cousin? What the hell? Who wants to watch this crap? Where the fuck is my cousin and the Crown Prince?" No need to confirm who that was. Obviously, that loud voice belonged to none other than Prince Xiaojing, Qi-Rong. Sure enough, many looked up and saw a young man, finely dressed in light turquoise brocade and a necklace, rush to the edge of that platform, shaking his fists angrily. This youth was no older than 15 or 16, his fair face and his brows black, rather attractive. But his face was twisted murderously, as if he was going to jump off the tower at any moment to beat someone. However, the tower was too tall. If he jumped, he'd break his legs, if not die. So instead, he grabbed a white jade teapot and hurled it down. That hurled teapot flew quickly right at the back of the demon's head, looking like it might knock him out on the spot and spill his blood. Unexpectedly, however, the demon shifted his stance, slanted his saber flat, and caught the teapot on the tip of the blade. The tottering teapot came to a stop, prompting another wave of cheers. Wu Ching then flicked the long saber, and the teapot was hurled into the air to be caught by someone below. He continued to play the role of the demon languidly, swinging the long saber, slaughtering humans. Qi-Rong was outraged and was about to throw something else, but the queen had ordered someone to pull him away, so he was reluctantly dragged off. Yet the faces of the nobles were looking more and more grim, and some were growing restless. That the god-pleasing martial warrior would disappear right before the heavenly procession and the Shangyuan festival was no laughing matter. Just then, a roaring cheer like a storm exploded from amongst the people, louder than the cheers from before. A snow-white silhouette had descended from the sky and landed right before the black-clad demon. Upon his landing, his heavy white robes fluttered and covered the grand stage in the shape of a giant flower, and a golden mask hid his face. He held a sword in one hand, and the other gently flicked that foreboding blade, the resounding ringing pleasing to the ear. This gesture was serene and confident, as if the demon meant nothing to him. The demon slowly raised his long saber and pointed it at him, and the white-clad martial warrior unhurriedly rose to his feet. And then there's an image of him. I'll send it.
I need to see it.
There's a lot of art of him in this outfit, 'cause it's really cute. Chi-Rong's eyes were shining bright, his face red. He jumped up and down, shouting, "Cousin Crown Prince! Cousin Crown Prince has come!" Above and below, all were agape. This entrance was like the descent of a real heavenly being, exceedingly audacious. The city's walls tower was at least 30 meters tall, and the eminent crown prince, whose person was worth 1,000 gold, had still leapt down from it. In that moment, thousands had thought a god had truly descended. When they recovered from their shock, fervor filled their veins. The crowd went hysterical, applauding with wild intensity. Chi-Rong, too, was shouting, leading the crowd in wild applause, yelling until his voice was hoarse, clapping until both his hands were red. The king and the queen shared a look, smiling, and applauded too. The rest of the nobles eased their furrowed brows and sighed a breath of relief before joining in the cheer. On either side of the grand avenue of divine might, the crowds went wild like crashing waves, hundreds and thousands of men so excited that they pushed against the royal guards, wanting to approach closer to holler. Upon the grand stage, two figures, one black, one white, faced each other. Each with their own weapon in hand, god and demon would finally face off. Seeing that everything had worked out, the state preceptor finally relaxed his shoulders and mounted the towering platform. After nodding to his fellows in greeting, he found a seat for himself and sat down. The king chuckled. "State preceptor, how did you come up with such an exhilarating entrance? How splendid." The state preceptor wiped his sweat from his face and smiled. "Splendid indeed, but unfortunately this lowly subject didn't come up with it. I'm afraid His Highness the Crown His Highness the Crown Prince's own idea." The queen patted her heart. That mischievous child, to jump from such a height without a word of warning. I almost stood up in fright. The state preceptor couldn't help but lace his words with pride. "My lady queen can be at ease. The martial might of His Highness the Crown Prince is extraordinary. Dozens of meters is nothing to him. Even with towers that are many times higher, he can still easily mount and easily jump off with his eyes closed." The queen appeared pleased and said gently, "Thanks to the teaching of the state preceptor." The state preceptor laughed. "It's nothing, it's nothing. His Highness the Crown Prince, darling of the heavens, is divinely gifted, marvelously talented, and graciously brilliant. It is the fortune accumulated from 3 lifetimes that gave this lowly subject the chance to become his teacher. I have a feeling that His Highness the Crown Prince's presence today will go down in history as the most impressive of the god-pleasing ceremonies martial matches." His words of praise were exceedingly smooth, alluding to the heavens. The king smiled and turned back to watch the performance. I hope that's the case. In the heavenly procession of the Shangwen festival, the god-pleasing martial warrior and the demon were the two most important roles. Both must be played by young men exceptionally skilled in martial arts. The god-pleasing martial warrior especially. The presentation and make of his costume were strict, transcendently magnificent, and after dressing, the weight of everything worn came to 25 or 30 kilos. The martial warrior must, under this heavy burden, before the eyes of millions, march around the capital a number of times and perform in the martial match for at least 4 hours. There must also be no mishaps throughout, and so the performer must be extraordinarily skilled. Fortunately, both of these young men were outstanding. It was a fierce match, the saber parried the sword, the combat was a thrilling sight to behold. The moves were also calculated to the minutest detail, obviously having been practiced and rehearsed many times. "Who's the one playing the demon and sparring with the crown prince?" the king asked. The state preceptor cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, he's a young trainee from the Royal Holy Temple. His name is Mu Ching." The queen said sweetly, "I see that child is also rather skilled in fighting, just a bit weaker than my son. Maybe about the same level as Feng Xin?" The state preceptor didn't appear to agree with her sentiment. Chirong had been lying on the queen's lap, eating grapes, and he spat out the skins in a rush. Psh! No way! Not just a bit weaker, he's far weaker. Not just anyone can compare to Cousin Crown Prince. Hearing this, the queen patted his head, smiling, and the rest of the nobles all laughed, their bodies swaying back and forth in mirth. They teased, Rong-er certainly clings to his cousin. If a day passes where he doesn't praise him, he's miserable. Down below, in the sea of people, the cheers and hollers were shooting through the heavens. Fight! Fight! Kill him! Slay the demon! The roars of excitement were growing stronger. Chirong was also adding to the noise, circling both his hands around his mouth like a trumpet, shouting and laughing. Cousin Crown Prince, go! You can easily knock him down with one hand. Show him how it's done! Suddenly, the demon on the stage slashed forward. The martial warrior repelled the attack with his sword, but made a noise of curiosity. During the heavenly parade, the martial match was a performance for pleasing the gods, and at most, one should use just a seventh of their power, pulling their swords at contact. However, with that strike he just received now, the sword in his hand had almost flown from his grip. Obviously, his opponent had used all of his might in that blow. Zhilian raised his head slightly and called out, Mu-Ching? The young man playing the demon didn't say a word, just slashed at him again. Zhilian had no time to think as he received one attack after the other, their weapons clanging. Well, this is more exciting than fake sparring, Zhilian thought, and his spirit heightened, immersing himself more into the fight. Thus, under the crashing roar of cheers, the weapons clashed and sparks flew. The more invigorating the fight was on stage, the louder the cheers below. Suddenly, there was a deafening clang, white light flashed, and the crowd gasped. Their breaths hitched. That 3-meter saber was flicked out of the demon's hand by the long, slender sword of the god-pleasing martial warrior, and was nailed directly into a stone pillar of the towering platform. A few bystanders tried to pull it out, but even when they pulled at it with all their strength, the long saber didn't move an inch. They were greatly astonished. What kind of saber is this? What strength you need to wield it? Upon the grand stage, the god-pleasing martial warrior shook his sword, and he flicked his finger on the blade again. Another resonant ring, and from behind the golden mask there came soft chuckling. You fought well, but you still lost, Zhilian said, cheerfully and leisurely. With his weapon lost, the demon bent one knee to the ground. He was still silent, but his fists clenched harder. Zhilian skillfully twirled his sword, and surrounded by the cheers from all around, prepared to make his final strike and slay the demon. What are you doing down there? I look up and you're just...
I'm plugging in my tablet.
Okay. Just then, there was screaming from above. Shocked, Zhilian lowered his sword and looked up, but he was only able to see a blurry shadow plunging rapidly from the city wall. In that split second, he didn't have time to think. He pointed his toes and pushed up off the ground in a flash to leap into the air, darting upward weightlessly. He surged and flew, his sleeves fluttering open like the wings of a butterfly, then landed gracefully, light as a feather. Firmly in his hold was a person, and only when he touched solid ground did Zhilian sigh a breath of relief and look down. In his arms there was a child, his head wrapped in bandages, dirty and unkempt. He was curled up in his hold and watching him dazedly. This child was no older than 7 or 8, and quite the small, gaunt creature. After falling from such a height, his little body was shaking uncontrollably in his arms like a newborn animal. However, from that mess of bandages wrapped around his head, there peeped a large black eye that reflected the silhouette of a snow-white figure. He was watching him unblinkingly, as if he could no longer see anything else. Loud gasps were heard from all around, and when Zhilian raised his head, his heart sank. In his peripheral vision, he saw lying on the ground, not far away, a golden object. The golden mask that hid his face had fallen. Zhilian had landed in the middle of the grand avenue of Divine Might, and the ceremonial parade was dozens of meters behind him, the procession not having made it this far yet. The sudden commotion broke the steady march of the warriors. The flower-tossing celestial maidens looked panicked. The golden carriages stopped, a number of white stallions stomping their hooves and neighing in alarm. And the strings missed notes, with their rhythm disrupted. Some kept going, and some stopped. Without being able to coordinate their march again, the entire situation was spiraling out of control. The crowd on both sides of the street still hadn't had the chance to react, but the king of Shenle upon the towering platform stood up immediately, looking worried and grave as he watched his son. The moment he stood, how could the rest of the nobles remain seated? Thus, they all rose to their feet in a frenzy. The state preceptor's bottom had only just warmed his seat, but now it was cold again. He was frantically deciding whether he needed to prostrate on all fours immediately to beg for forgiveness, when Chi-Rong leapt up onto the railing, his sleeves rolled up, shouting in rage. "What's going on? What's happening? Why did the procession fall into chaos? What the hell are you useless trash doing? Did you all eat nothing but plain rice? Can't even hold your horses?" The queen's face was pale, her brows lightly knitted, and she hurriedly sent for another person to drag him back. The crowds were growing agitated, and a riot was about to erupt just then. Just then, Shilian rose to his feet once more. Usually, the honorable crown prince was hidden deep within the palace, or training at the royal holy temple, so he rarely had the chance to show his face to the people. This was such a rare occasion that many couldn't help but be intrigued, their gazes all falling on him. Yet when they gazed upon his face, their breathing hitched. That young man had long brows and charming eyes, exceptionally handsome, radiating nobility, so dazzling it forced down the eyes of those looking. With the child in one arm, he slowly raised the other with sword in hand, and pointed it to the grand stage. The demon had been observing the situation from above the stage, and seeing that gesture, he paused for a moment before leaping off the parade float. The crowd wowed in amazement as the demon, his form like a streak of black cloud, stole through the air to the stone pillar where the saber was deeply embedded. He gripped the hilt and yanked the saber out of the crack, then flipped again to land in the middle of the street before the martial warrior. Seeing that he instantaneously understood his intentions and came forward to cooperate, Shilian lauded him under his breath. "Good, Mucheng." Now, both the god-pleasing martial warrior and the demon had descended from the stage. One black, one white, one saber, and one sword clashed once again, heightening the excitement, electrifying the crowd. Upon the towering platform, the faces of nobles finally relaxed, looking appeased. The demon feigned aiming for the child in the warrior's arms. With both his hands gripping the saber, he flashed the blade, then lunged at Shilian. The two faked parrying, move after move, strike after strike, before they leapt back onto the stage anew. While the crowd was distracted, Mucheng used the opportunity to do a somersault onto the stage and grab that golden mask, then dashed through the procession, urging in a low voice, "Stay in formation, compose yourselves, pretend nothing's happened, and continue the march. Finish marching this round and return to the palace." Everyone in the procession immediately steadied and returned to their posts, their spirits renewed. The moment Mucheng returned to the stage, his attacks became even more vigorous, clinking and clanking as Shilian received more slashes. Just then, the child in his arms cried out, probably terrified from being stuck between the clashing weapons. Shilian's left hand held him tighter, and he whispered, "Don't be scared." Hearing his words, the small child clutched to the folds of Shilian's robes at his chest. Even with the child in one arm and the other hands handling a sword, Shilian was still fighting with ease. After parrying for a while, he felt the child in his hold raise his trembling arms and grab his shoulders in a desperate grip, as if he were hanging on for dear life. Shilian soothed again, "Don't worry, nothing will hurt you." Then Shilian ordered in a hushed voice, "Mucheng!" The demon facing him imperceptibly nodded, and Shilian struck. Thus, before the eyes of millions, the god-pleasing martial warrior pierced the heart of the demon, slaying it on the spot. Mucheng, with his demon mask on, clutched his wound, stumbled back a few steps, and struggled for a moment before finally, thud, he fell to the ground and stopped moving. Above on the platform, Chi-Rong laughed out loud, applauding. "Dead! He's dead! Cousin Crown Prince has slain the demon dead!" While all this was happening, the magnificent heavenly procession had continued to march and soon moved onto the path back to the palace. Because of how well the act was saved and how the unexpected improvised act was so exhilarating to watch, not only did the people not complain, but their excitement grew even stronger. Countless within the crowd were shouting, "Your Highness!" or hollering, "God!" and followed behind the grand stage, thousands upon millions rushing to the palace. A few generals had to send out more troops of warriors and soldiers to block the overly excited people. In the end, they still couldn't hold them back, and the crowd broke through, pushing themselves towards the palace gates. The king of Shenle ordered from the top of the towering platform, "Guards! Warriors!" Meanwhile, the hundreds within the procession had re-entered the palace, and the giant scarlet gates closed soundly shut after the grand stage, the colorful banners of the performance now out of sight. The people rushed the gates, knocking and slapping upon it, their cheers shooting to the heavens. Inside those firmly shut palace gates, upon the grand stage, the white-clad god-pleasing martial warrior and the black-clad demon both tossed their weapons aside with clanking sounds before they collapsed heavily on the ground. Chilian was covered in sweat and ripped open layer after layer of his elegant costume before he heaved a long breath. That was close, too close, I'm exhausted. Muching also removed his heavy demon mask and let out a silent sigh, but he didn't complain about being tired. When he looked over, he saw Chilian was still holding on to that young child, and frowned wordlessly. Feng Xin, on the other hand, called out as he followed after the grand stage in a jog. "Your Highness, what are you doing bringing that child in too?" The young child was laying on Chilian's chest, his small body frozen and unmoving, afraid to even breathe loudly. Chilian sat up. What was I to do? Throw him back out on the streets? It's a mess out there, and he's such a tiny creature. He'd get trampled to death. He held up the small child and stroked his head, asking casually, "How old are you, little one?" The child didn't blink, and his lips uttered no sounds. Chilian continued his query, coaxing, "How did you come to fall earlier?" "Your Highness, the child probably doesn't dare to speak. He's obviously scared witless," Wu Qing said. Chilian stroked the head of the child again, but his unresponsiveness was making him lose interest, so he eventually stopped. "What a silly child," Chilian commented. "Feng Xin, go find someone to take him out through the side doors when you get a chance. And check if he's injured. His head is wrapped in bandages." "All right," Feng Xin extended his hand. "Give him here." Chilian held the young child up to pass him over, but when he tried, Feng Xin said, "Your Highness, why haven't you let go?" "I did let go?" Chilian was puzzled, but when he looked down, he laughed in exasperation. Turned out it was the child, who was still clutching tightly onto his clothes, refusing to let go. A few were taken aback and started laughing out loud. While training at the Royal Holy Temple, so many devotees, men and women alike, tried their hardest to get a glimpse of Chilian, whether out of curiosity or devotion. But as soon as they'd seen him once, they would want to see him again. If they could train next to him, even better. They couldn't believe that a child of such a young age would be the same. Guarding the grand stage were many young trainees from the Royal Holy Temple, and they all laughed. "Your Highness, this child doesn't want to leave." Chilian also laughed. "Is that right? That won't do. I've got my own things to take care of. Go home, little guy." At his words, the child finally, slowly, loosened his grip, letting go of his clothes, and Feng Xin picked him up. Even when Feng Xin was the one holding him, the child still stared fixedly at Chilian with his big, bright black eye, almost as if he'd been possessed. At this sight, many started grumbling under their breaths. Chilian himself, however, wasn't even looking at the child anymore, and only spoke to Feng Xin directly. "Don't dangle him like you're picking up trash. You're scaring him." Feng Xin put the child back down on the ground. "Enough joking around. The state preceptor is freaking out. Your Highness better think about how you're going to face him later." Hearing this, everyone stopped laughing. What time is it?
It's 5:56, but just read the chat. I have to be right back.
Okay.
I'm gonna also cook some food.
Okay.
Hey, what's the brain open? Hello.
Hold on, I'm getting more cough drops.
Okay.
Whoa, the way he just leaped. He was like a fucking squirrel. Are you able to focus or do I need to put on the Chinese music?
I was listening,
Okay.
but I haven't started drawing yet, so I don't know how well.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep going because these bitches aren't starting for a while.
I'll let you know when I need to get my pizza.
Okay. Hold on. Let me get settled here. I need to lock in. Alright.
I also need to lock in.
Alright. An hour later at the Royal Holy Temple on the Divine Might Summit inside the Palace of Divine Might. Clouds of incense wafted in the air, and the sound of chanting came in waves. The chief state preceptor and 3 other deputy state preceptors sat in a line by the side wall within the great hall, their faces clouded. Wu Qing was kneeling before them. Shilian was also kneeling, but before him was no one but the golden statue of the heavenly emperor. Feng Xin followed his master and knelt behind him. The state preceptor picked up the exquisitely crafted golden mask, and after a moment he heaved a heavy sigh. Your Highness, Your Highness. Even when kneeling, Shilian's back was straight, his posture perfect, and his head held high. Present. The state preceptor looked pained. Do you know that in the history of Shenle and the countless Shengyuan heavenly ceremonial processions we have held, never once has the grand stage only circled the capital thrice. Thrice! In the Shengyuan heavenly ceremonial procession, every ritual, every decoration, every place had a meaning behind it. To have the grand stage circle the capital once symbolized the kingdom's prayer for the peace and prosperity of the people for 1 year. Thus, however many rounds the grand stage made meant that many years before another such grand ceremony would need to take place. Not only did this signify good fortune, it also saved money. Having only made 3 rounds, didn't that mean the kingdom would only be protected for 3 years? The worst thing on top of that was that the golden mask at the face of the god-pleasing martial warrior had fallen mid-ritual. Since ancient times, the people of Shenle had believed that the spiritual chi of a person gathered upon the 5 facial features. The spirit of a person was on their face, and the best must be offered to the heavens. Thus, while performing the ceremony, the martial warrior must wear a golden mask to hide his face, because his face could only be appreciated by the gods, and mortals had no right to see it. The state preceptor was both furious and disappointed. The god-pleasing martial warriors of the past circled the capital at least 5 times, at most 15 or 16 times. You could do 50 with your eyes closed, 100 even. But you killed yourself dead at 3. Why didn't you just kill me, your Shifu, first? Now look at you. Our dear Highness the Crown Prince is going to go down in history, dragging me along with you. No one dared speak in the great hall, and yet Shilian still looked at ease and responded calmly. Perhaps the state preceptor should look at it this way. If that child had fallen to his death, and no one to catch him, spilling blood on the path of the procession, wouldn't that be equally ominous? Wouldn't the parade still have to come to a stop? And at the very least, the ceremony ended fairly respectably, which was the best case scenario. Let's just call what happened an accident. For a moment, the state preceptor's words were stuck in his throat, but then he blew up. You child! With so many royal guards at the scene, anyone could have caught him. Even if the catch was off and he broke his arm, he wouldn't have died. You could have just marched forward a few steps, performed a little flashier, and everyone would have forgotten what had fallen and moved on. Shilian raised his brows, however. State preceptor, you understand as well as I do. Under those circumstances, no one else but me could have reacted as fast. And there was no second person who could have caught him without being injured. Let him fall, there'd be 1 dead. Catch him, and there'd be 2 dead. His tone was matter-of-fact and confident. The state preceptor also knew that what he said was true and couldn't refute him. Seeing him kneel before the divine statue, looking like all was well and nothing was the matter, made the state preceptor angry, amused, and proud all at once. Before his precious darling disciple, he just couldn't get angry, and could only pull at his own hair and use the pain of his scalp to relieve the worry in his heart. After a pause, the state preceptor spoke again. "Another thing." Julien inclined his head. "This disciple is listening." "You did well on stage today," the state preceptor said. But no matter how well you perform, you can't just suddenly change things up right before the start without a word of warning. Both majesties were terrified by your act today. Do you know what would have happened if we missed the fortuitous hour?" Julien raised his brows, looking puzzled. "State preceptor, hadn't I already asked for your permission in regard to this matter before today?" The state preceptor was taken aback too. "You asked already? Before today? When?" Hearing this, Julien turned his head to the side, his brows furrowed. "Muqing?" Oh, it's the end of the chapter. Muqing? Let me chew this shit.
No.
Okay. Ugh. My throat.
Your throat.
Okay. Chapter 26. Lost Red Pearl inadvertently luring the red-eyed. Just then, Feng Xin, who was kneeling behind Julien, spoke up grimly. "His Highness did indeed mention it yesterday." All eyes moved to him, and Feng Xin continued. "Recently, His Highness has been putting a lot of thought into the heavenly procession, and yesterday he suddenly came up with the extraordinary idea of jumping off the tower to simulate celestial descent without changing anything else in the programming. At the time, His Highness was in the middle of rehearsals and couldn't excuse himself, so he sent Muqing to pass on word to the state preceptor and request the go-ahead." He raised his head, slight anger in his eyes. Muqing returned and told His Highness that the state preceptors had been informed, so His Highness performed today under the impression that he had permission. Who knew that the state preceptor was never told, and we almost ruined the event? The cultivators all looked at each other in dismay. The state preceptor asked, "Who knew of this?" The 3 deputy state preceptors shook their heads, all denying that they knew anything. The state preceptor turned to Muqing, his stormy expression turning into one of indignant anger. "Muqing, you intentionally withheld this communication?" His words and expression showed he already firmly believed that Muqing had purposely sabotaged the event. Julien glanced at the silent, thin youth kneeling on the side and pondered his words before he spoke. "State preceptor, I think there must be some kind of misunderstanding here." Hearing this, Muqing slowly looked over, his gaze profoundly dark, but not lingering. Julien said, "If he had purposely held back word, once the event was over and we all compared notes, his deceit would be exposed, and there'd be no way he could escape responsibility. Muqing's not a short-sighted imbecile, and he wouldn't have come up with such a low tactic. Besides, with the god-pleasing martial warrior missing, what advantage does his demon opponent have? Please hear him out, state preceptor, and then draw your conclusions." Finishing his speech, Julien inclined his head. "Tell us, Muqing, what happened?" Muqing lowered his eyes and said softly, "I did pass on what His Highness bade me yesterday." The state preceptor frowned. "Wouldn't we know ourselves what you did or did not say? When did you tell us?" "Yesterday, an hour after the evening lesson, when the 4 state preceptors were resting at Xixiang Palace. This disciple spoke from outside the window," Muqing said. The state preceptor turned his head to his 3 fellows, looking puzzled. "Yesterday, after the evening lessons? What were we doing then?" Just as he asked, he remembered, and traces of awkwardness colored his face. The other 3 deputy state preceptors also coughed nervously, their responses ambiguous. "Nothing really, just resting. Resting is resting." Seeing how the state preceptors stammered, everyone understood immediately. The Royal Holy Temple was a place of quiet meditation and training, and there was very little entertainment save for the small games that could serve as amusement. One of them, the most popular one, was playing cards. Cards could only be played in secret, seen by no one. The state preceptors had long been bored out of their minds residing at the Royal Holy Temple, so they were heavily addicted. When they started playing, they would forget everything and everyone and fall into a state akin to hysterical obsession or drunkenness. Nothing from the outside world could be heard. If Mooching had told them anything in that time, how could they possibly hear? One of the deputy state preceptors said, maybe there were too many people. Your voice was too quiet and we didn't hear clearly. Yeah, we didn't hear clearly. The state preceptor, on the other hand, was doubtful. Did you actually go to Xishiang Palace yesterday? I absolutely did, Mooching said, and as proof he relayed without fault the dress, look, and accent of the guard standing at the door. The state preceptor had to believe him, but he still frowned. If you had gone to Xishan Palace, you could have just passed on the message to the trainee outside the door, or entered the chamber and spoken to us in detail. Why speak outside the window? Why, you didn't even confirm whether we heard? Mooching responded softly. This disciple tried. This disciple spoke politely to the Xishan guarding the door, but for some reason that Xishan had to make things difficult and wouldn't let me into the chamber or pass on word for me. He mocked me and drove me away. After a pause, he continued, This disciple had no other choice, so I went around to the other side of Xishan Palace and tried to pass on the message through the window. After I spoke, I heard one of the state preceptors say, I get it, now leave. So this disciple took that as consent to His Highness's plans and returned. The state preceptors pursed their lips and didn't speak. At the height of a round of cards, who would pay attention to whatever was said outside? If they could hear anything, of course they'd respond offhandedly with, I get it, I get it. But they probably didn't even know where the voice came from. Julien knitted his brows. That such a thing would happen. Which trainee was impudent? He's got guts to be so disrespectful to one of my messengers. Although Julien was usually friendly and rarely put on airs when interacting with others at the Royal Holy Temple, he was still nonetheless the esteemed son of the king and prominent crown prince. Even as he knelt before the statue of a god, he had not shown any humility. So with this sudden turn to sternness, he was authoritative without needing fury. Everyone fell quiet, and the state preceptors wore unreadable expressions on their faces. Why didn't you report this to me when you returned yesterday? Julien asked. Mooching turned around while still kneeling and prostrated, his voice quiet. Your Highness, there's no need to look further into the matter with that Xishiang. I didn't say anything after returning yesterday simply because I didn't want to make it into a big deal. At any case, it's nothing major. If your Highness was to defend me openly, it would hurt the camaraderie between everyone. Julien disagreed, sounding upset. What camaraderie are you talking about? The kind of camaraderie that's used to abuse others? Hearing this, the state preceptors sitting at the side looked even more agitated. At the end of the day, something like this happened because the state preceptors disliked Mooching. When they were displeased, the trainee attendants naturally followed their lead, not to mention that Mooching himself simply wasn't very likable. So, not only did fellow trainees avoid helping him, they went out of their way to make things difficult for him at every turn. Of course, their high and mighty disciple wasn't trying to ridicule them on purpose, but he certainly did take a jab. Mooching was continuously making concessions in his story, but Feng Shen couldn't listen for another minute and suddenly interjected. It really was nothing major, but you had to go and make it complicated. If you had told the trainee at the door that you came to deliver a message from His Highness's command, would he still have the gall to block your way? Also, right before we departed today, the state preceptor asked you where His Highness went. Why did you answer so vaguely? Could you not have said clearly that His Highness was on top of the tower waiting for the procession to start? Mooching immediately argued back, calm and steady. I thought the state preceptor already knew and didn't expect to be asked that question, so I was confused. But right after, I told the state preceptor that His Highness had already said not to worry, that the procession could start without delay as planned, and that His Highness would be back promptly. His Highness might not have been there at the time, but there were many at the scene who heard me, so how can you say I did this intentionally, or that I was being vague? Feng Shen stared at him angrily, but if he thought about it carefully, Mooching did in fact say all that. The problem was that the state preceptor was too anxious and didn't want to make hasty decisions. If he was going to pick at faults, there really wasn't enough evidence to prove anything. Just then, Julien spoke up again. All right. It was all just an untimely mistake, a misunderstanding. Let's count it as bad luck, so stop fighting. Feng Shen looked extremely displeased, but mindful of his position. He dared not to be clamorous in the Palace of Divine Might, and stopped talking. The state preceptor didn't want to pursue this topic anymore either. After all, if they must get to the heart of the topic, wasn't he at fault too for being too engrossed in card games? Thus he simply waved and sighed. Let's talk about that later, and we shall put our heads together and think of a way to see how this situation can be salvaged. The three of you are dismissed. Go remove your costumes and do whatever else you must. Julien bowed and rose to his feet immediately. Feng Shen and Mu Qing both properly kowtowed before rising, following Julien, who was about to leave. Julien had 1 foot over the threshold when he heard the state preceptor speak up again. Your Highness. Julien turned his head. Both His Majesty and Her Ladyship the Queen asked after you today. If you have time, in the next few days, go and see them, the state preceptor said. Julien grinned. This disciple understands. After leaving the Palace of Divine Might, the three of them traversed a large portion of the summit and returned to the training hall built especially for the Crown Prince, the Palace of Shenle. There, Julien could finally remove his ceremonial garb. As mentioned before, for the Shangyuan Heavenly Ceremonial Procession, the ceremonial attire of the god-pleasing martial warrior was exceedingly strict in every detail. Each accessory and fold had meaning and could never be mismanaged. For example, the outer robe was white, symbolizing divine purity. The inner robes were red, symbolizing canonical tradition. The golden crown that fastened his hair symbolized imperial power and wealth, and the white plumes folded away by the heart symbolized the flight to ascension. Loose corded ribbons along the sleeves symbolized his duty to carry the common people, and so on and so on. It was easy to imagine that from head to toe, both wearing and removing it was no simple task. However, as the esteemed Crown Prince, naturally, he needn't do anything himself. He only had to stand and open his arms wide in that refreshing, fragrant chamber and chat with Feng Shen while he waited for his personal attendant Mu Qing to help him remove layer after layer of the god-pleasing costume. The outer white robe of the god-pleasing costume was high quality. The pattern of the thread was exquisite and detailed, and the fringes were sewed with intricate, light golden patterns, elegant but not frivolous. In comparison, the black martial gi of the demon costume was like the difference between heaven and earth. Mu Qing himself... Okay.
Beepa.
Beepa.
I burnt it a little bit.
Oh no. Oh no. No, no, no. Where's my water?
Up your ass. I don't...
Oh.
I like this pose, but it's not working.
Is it something I can show on stream?
No.
Then no, I
Not yet. Not
can't
yet.
give you opinions.
Well, not. It's too much.
Okay.
Hold on.
Censor it, and I'll show it to me. Show it to me, Rachel!
Oh. Okay. Hold on.
Show it to me, Leon.
Oh, that's mean. The
Penis?
no, not that. The perspective. Certain thing. Hold on. Where the fuck are my? Okay, this one. I can do this. Oh no, I can't. Nope. Where the fuck are my little items?
Bro, the way your chair is so ripped up from Wesker is so funny.
I know.
It's literally like falling apart. Dude's only like a year old.
Literally, he's a fucking freak. I have had this for like 3-4 years now.
Yeah, but you've only had the cat for like a year.
I know. Okay.
Show it to me. Show me to me, please.
Girl.
I'm a new mommy. Whoa! Whoa!
I
Nice.
told you. I just
Nice.
like the
The caution keep out fucking it's
yeah.
funny. I'm a
Um,
new mommy. Are
hold
you
on.
doing the sword scene? Oh no, okay, there he
No.
is.
Yes.
I was like, what's going on here?
Give
What's
me
going
just
on?
I just the perspective of that like angled
Okay, stop
leg
showing
is
it to me.
fucking
Stop
me
showing
up.
it to me.
Okay. What are you getting horny?
No, I just don't want to get banned from YouTube.
Yeah, I know. I can share with you.
Okay, I'm reading. Wait, where did I leave? Okay. Wait. Okay. The outer white robe of the god-pleasing costume was of high quality. The pattern of the thread was exquisite and detailed, and the fringes were sewn with intricate light golden patterns, elegant but not frivolous. In comparison, the black martial gi of the demon costume was like the difference between heaven and earth. Mooching himself hadn't removed his black gear yet, but his hands full with the god-pleasing costume he had removed from Shilian. His fingers twitched, imperceptibly stroking. Sorry, coughing.
Oh my god.
His fingers twitched, imperceptibly stroking the material of that white robe. Next to him, Sholian removed the golden crown, letting his long hair loose as he sat down at the edge of his sandalwood bed.
Bro.
Sorry. He kicked off his snow-white boots and waited for someone to bring him fresh clothes. He waited for a bit, but noticed that Mooching wasn't moving, so he tilted his head. He asked, "What's wrong?" Mooching quickly snapped out of it and replied, "The costume seems dirty in some places." Shilian hummed thoughtfully and said, "Bring it over and let me see." Sure enough, the snow-white attire was marked with two distinct little black handprints. Shilian took a look and remarked, "They're probably from that little kid who fell from the sky. He was grabbing onto me and wouldn't let go. The child's face was wrapped in bandages, so maybe he had taken a tumble somewhere else or something. Function, did you check him out?" Function was just wrapping up the sword and long saber used during the god-pleasing performance, and he replied gloomily, "No, I took him out of the palace and was about to take a look at his face, as you asked, but he kicked me in the shin, and it actually fucking hurt." Shilian fell over on the bed laughing, pointing at him. "It must be because you're so mean. Otherwise, why did he kick you but not me?" "I wasn't mean," Function cried. "That damn kid ran away so quick it was like he was possessed by the devil or something. If he hadn't, I would have picked him upside down and shook him until he cried from fright." Mooching turned the white robe over in his hands. "I hope that kid isn't a beggar. He's so dirty. A simple grab left black prints like these. Your Highness, the god-pleasing costume can't be dirty. Isn't that another bad omen?" Shilian stayed lying in the bed, and he casually grabbed a book from the headboard and used it to cover half of his face. "3 times around the capital, my good name's already going down in history with that incredible record. If it's dirty, it's dirty. Just wash it." After a pause, Mooching replied quietly, "I will do my best to be careful when I wash it." Shilian flipped through the book and came to a page illustrating the art of the saber, and he remembered the vigorous sparring earlier that day on stage. He smiled. "Mooching, you fought well on stage today." Mooching's shoulders stiffened. Shilian continued, "It was only today that I discovered that you're much more skilled with the saber than you were with the sword." Mooching's face relaxed, and he turned around. There was even a little smile playing on his lips. "Really?" "Yeah," Shilian answered. "But you might have been too hasty. Swinging a saber isn't like swinging a sword. Look here." The moment the topic shifted to martial arts, Shilian became highly enthusiastic, even more possessed than the state preceptors playing cards. He jumped off the bed without even putting on his shoes, demonstrating his point on the spot using his hands as an imaginary saber. Mooching wore a complicated expression, but after Shilian demonstrated a few moves, he started to watch seriously. Function, on the other hand, swung the now properly wrapped long saber and chased Shilian back onto his bed with it, scolding as he did so. "If you're going to show off, at least put on your shoes before you do. You're the crown prince, hair loose and feet bare. What a disgrace." Julian was just at the height of his excitement when he got chased onto the bed like a duck to a pen. He sulked. All right, geez, he said, and ran both hands through his long hair, ready to tie it up before continuing his lecture to Mooching. Suddenly he frowned. That's weird. What is it? Feng Xin asked. Julian pulled on his earlobes. One of the earrings is gone. And then there's a cute picture of them as children. Hold on. The people of Shenle believed that the pinnacle of Taoist cultivation was the harmony of yin and yang, the unity of male and female. The forms of the gods were inexhaustibly changing and naturally unbound by gender restrictions, shifting male or female as they willed. And that belief was woven into the design of the god-pleasing costume. Throughout history, every god-pleasing martial warrior was adorned with accessories that possessed the form and details of both sexes. Earrings, bracelets, and so on. When Chulian was preparing for the role, he pierced his ears and put on a pair of earrings. They were a pair of magnificent deep coral pearls that gleamed resplendently, lustrous and smooth, and extremely rare. However, when Chulian was combing his hair just now, only one of the red coral pearls from the pair was left. The moment he said it was lost, Wu Qing's relaxed expression froze again, but the other two did not notice at all. Feng Xin looked all over the chamber first, inside and out, but returned empty-handed. You're so scatterbrained that you can lose these things worn on your ears. I didn't see it at the Palace of Shenle, so I'll go out and search the roads. It better not have gotten lost during the parade. Julian was puzzled too, but he also didn't care that much. Maybe. If it did, then there's no way he'll find it. If it's lost, it's lost. Mu Qing, however, brought out the broom he usually used to sweep. He said quietly, That pearl is too precious. We should at least try to look for it. Maybe it rolled under the bed or a shelf. He then started sweeping, and Julian responded, Why don't we call for a few more hands to help? Crowds get handsy. We don't want anyone sneaking it into their pockets before we find anything, Feng Xin said offhandedly. Mu Qing was quietly checking under the bed, but when he heard Feng Xin's words, his face momentarily turned to a shade of deathly white. He shot to his feet, and crack! The broom in his hand snapped in two. Julian was startled. Ever since they left the Palace of Divine Might, Feng Xin had been filled with complaints about Mu Qing, but he never let any of them loose. Now that he saw Mu Qing blow up first, he got angry too. What are you doing, breaking things so suddenly? Who pissed you off now? Mu Qing replied coldly, Why don't you tell me straight what you really want to say, instead of casting shadows where there are none? I have nothing to do with the lost pearl. Feng Xin had always been a straightforward individual, and this was the first time he heard someone accuse him of casting shadows where there were none. He laughed from sheer anger. Why don't you tell that to yourself? What did I say? I didn't say you stole it, but you got all flustered. What, feeling guilty? Julian broke out of his shock and sat up on the bed crying, Oh no, in his head. Feng Xin, that's enough. A few veins popped out of Mu Qing's forehead. Feng Xin really didn't think much of it and asked in confusion, What? It really wasn't the right time for Julian to explain, so he could only try to pacify Mu Qing. Don't misunderstand. Feng Xin was just making offhanded comments. He wasn't targeting you. Mu Qing clenched his fists again, then released them, and at last took control of his temper. However, his eyes were growing red, and he turned to Julian, enunciating each word as he stared at him. You don't keep your promises. No, you're wrong, Julian cried. Mu Qing closed his mouth and took a few breaths, then cast a furious stink-eye at Feng Xin. Without another word, he dashed out the door. Julian jumped off the bed and was about to give chase, but he was yanked to a stop mid-step. Your Highness, you haven't even put on shoes. It'd be a disgrace to go out with your hair down in such a mess. Help me stop him, Julian ordered. At least put your shoes on first and tie your hair, Feng Xin said, and leave him be. He's always booty like this. Who knows what nerve we touched to make him go mental out of the blue. Mu Qing was long gone by then, and Julian knew he wouldn't be able to catch up anyway. Instead, he grabbed for a hair tie to fasten his hair in a rush. He sighed as he did so. He wasn't going mental, you just said the wrong thing by accident. Feng Xin brought Julian's usual white training garb out of the closet and threw it at him. What did I say wrong? Julian replied, as he slipped on his boots, I can't tell you. Either way, come with me to find him and tell him it was all a misunderstanding, that you weren't accusing him of anything. Feng Xin frowned. Why can't you tell me? Julian's lips were sealed tight. Feng Xin was growing more suspicious and thought back on Mu Qing's furious expression just now. He spoke up suddenly. "He didn't actually steal from you before, did he?" Shilian immediately made a vigorous shushing gesture with his hand. "No, no." Seeing him like this, Feng Shen was even more sure. "So that's it. No wonder his face changed so drastically. It's because I touched a raw nerve. When did he steal?" "Not so loud," Shilian hushed anxiously. Feng Shing hushed his voice. "Something like that happened and you didn't even tell me? Tell me now." Since Feng Shen was already suspicious, Shilian figured if he kept lying, it would come out either way. He had to woefully relent. "It doesn't really count as stealing, but," Shilian sighed, "I'll start from the beginning. Do you remember 2 years ago when I first entered the Royal Holy Temple? There was a time when I lost a leaf of gold foil." Hearing this, Feng Shen's eyes widened, and he slapped his thigh. "It was then?" 3 years ago, Shilian begged and pestered in all manner of ways until his parents finally relented and allowed him to enter the Royal Holy Temple for training before the age of 20. A year later, when construction was complete on the palace of Shenle, Shilian jubilantly entered the mountain. When Shilian first moved in, the amount of luggage he brought personally wasn't particularly large. He had only 2 carriages full of books and 200 treasured swords. But the queen loved her son dearly and was afraid that the ascetic life would be too quiet and austere, so later she ordered 20 servants and 4 large carriages full of the crown prince's most beloved trinkets to be sent to Mount Taisong. It was an impressive dramatic sight as those caravans drove up the mountain. Included in this care package was a set of 108 leaves that made up a golden foil palace. Building a palace out of gold foil was a popular game enjoyed by the Shenle nobility. At the time, so much luxury appearing on the mountain caused a small wave of complaints. The Royal Holy Temple consisted of serious cultivators who weren't that familiar with the prince's character just yet, and although they couldn't say much publicly, there was much grumbling behind his back. Did His Highness the Crown Prince come to train or to play? What could this son of the royal family cultivate if he only came here for the fun of it? When Feng Shen heard those complaints, he had a mind to dispute them, but Shilian told him not to worry about it with a smile. "It's only natural they should think that way. They'll know soon enough that I'm not here to play games, and they'll also know soon enough who among us is the true number one of this generation of trainees." However, not long after, there was an incident. Shilian was trying to send back as many of the 4 large carriages and servants from the queen as possible. But when he was going through the inventory, he found that in the pack of 108 leaves of gold foil, one was missing. That set of gold foil sheets had been packaged in the carriages, and once at Mount Taisong, it had never left the palace of Shenle. If it wasn't lost on the road, then it had to have been stolen. Nothing was found on the road, so Shilian brought it up offhand to the state preceptor. Assuming it had been stolen, the state preceptor was enraged that someone within the Royal Holy Temple would commit the crime of robbery under the allure of golden foil. He was determined to recover the golden leaf at all cost, and if it should be found on anyone, the punishment would be severe to the utmost. Thus the over 3,000 disciples of Mount Taisong were caught completely off guard when they had to drop what they were doing to be forced into teams to search room after room, chamber after chamber, for every single training hall. It was a huge rigmarole that exhausted everyone. Yet unexpectedly, halfway through the search, Shilian abruptly changed his tune and apologized for causing everyone trouble, and said he suddenly remembered that he had already lost a leaf from the set of gold foil while he was still at the Imperial Palace. There should only be 107 leaves total after all. To investigate the whereabouts of the missing gold foil that night, the Royal Holy Temple went through a great deal of pain and was thrown into total confusion. So when His Highness the Crown Prince suddenly announced that they should forget the whole thing, when everyone was sweating with exhaustion, it was inevitable that many of the other disciples felt aggrieved. Thus, for the longest time afterward, there was talk behind his back. Things like, well, he's the Crown Prince, so he gets to call the shots, and hopefully next time his memory will be better, and he'll remember the important things before calling for an investigation. And so on. Feng Shen was furious listening to it, but Shilian still told him not to mind it, and to quietly give it time. Sure enough, after that, Shilian crushed all 3,000 disciples completely, and proved that he fully deserved the title number 1 of the Royal Holy Temple. And because he was genuinely friendly and didn't rely on his background, his reputation gradually improved amongst his peers. Function wasn't one to remember the petty details, so he had forgotten this had happened. Now that it was brought up again, it dawned on him, and he was both shocked and angry. It was Mu Ching who walked away with that gold foil? Shh! Julian hushed him, and looked around to make sure no one was around. That gold foil leaf fell out of the rattling carriage while coming up the mountain. Mu Ching was passing by while carrying water and found it in the bushes. He kept it under his bed and hadn't figured out what to do with it, but the very night the state preceptor suddenly struck, ushering everyone out to search their rooms, I didn't know him at the time, just saw an errand boy who looked distraught. Later, while I was sitting outside, he came up to serve me tea and admitted everything. That's how I found out. Taking without telling is stealing. So you helped him bury the whole incident and told everyone that gold foil was lost in the Imperial Palace? While they were talking, Shilian had finished dressing and headed out the door. That's how it is. Function was going to die from rage. He followed Shilian. Your Highness, do you know how many people talked about you behind your back when you first came to the Royal Holy Temple? Keep it down, Shilian said. He really did look quite distraught at the time, pale as a ghost. People here at the Royal Holy Temple already disliked him, so if I had said anything, his life here would be over. Our places in life are different, and we stand at different vantage points in this matter. The consequences can't be compared. Just then, a few young trainees approached them and gave them courteous bows, their faces full of smiles while greeting them. Your Highness! Shilian answered back with his own matching smile, and the two parties brushed past each other. He said to Function, See, I told you to give it time. Now I get along with everyone here, and who dares say anything bad about me? The two of them entered Mu Ching's bedchamber, but didn't see a soul, so they left to keep searching. I already thought it was strange at the time, since I hadn't heard that you'd lost any leaves at the palace, Function said. But I can't believe you didn't tell me about this for 2 years. You even told me that you met him while he was sweeping. He asked me later not to tell anyone, Shilian said. I agreed, so of course I wouldn't tell, not even you. Since you know, that means I went back on my word. So you mustn't tell anyone else. How does that even count as going back on your word? Function said. It's not like you told me anything. It's his own guilty conscience making him freak out that gave him away. No, you promise me right now that this stops here. Otherwise, I'll break up my relationship with you, and you'll be cursed to never find a wife, Shilian threatened. Function snorted dismissively. You break up with me? The day after our breakup, everyone in the kingdom of Shenle will know one thing. His Highness the Crown Prince fainted from tying his sock strings too tight while dressing. Fine, I won't say a word. Who gives a fuck about gossip anyways? After a pause, he still decided to comment. I bet he thinks I'm always picking on him because I know about this gold foil business. But really, I just don't like people like him. A grown man overthinking so much of this and that. He must have suspected you told me a long time ago. Not even concubines in a harem have minds as convoluted as his. It's so annoying. He's not as bad as you make it sound, Shilian said. The Royal Holy Temple had never lost anything before, meaning this was the first time he took something, and at the end of the day, it was for his mother. Well, anyways, he already swore that he would never do it again, so giving him another chance wasn't wrong. And he kept his word. Besides, when that little kid fell today, if Mu Ching hadn't cooperated with me, the parade wouldn't have ended so smoothly. Function clicked his tongue. You're already going down in history for only making it 3 rounds around the capital, so of course he won't vex you further. Your Highness, I'm telling you, I don't believe a word he said at the Palace of Divine Might. Who here in the Royal Holy Temple doesn't know when the State Preceptor plays cards, he hears and sees no one? He had to pick that time to pass on the message and stubbornly refused to clarify under whose orders he was sent. It's like he was purposely trying to screw things up. Shilian shook his head and said gravely, To be honest, I may have been thoughtless in regard to this. I know Mu Ching is disliked, so I originally wanted him to run more errands for me. I thought that if I let people know he's my personal attendant, they'd be nicer to him, but I didn't realize they were already so nasty. Not only did nothing get done, he got bullied too. If you think about it from another angle, you'll find his moodiness understandable. Function disagreed wholeheartedly. Why are you blaming yourself for his moodiness? You're the Crown Prince. How did you end up owing anyone anything for showing them favor? Your Highness, I don't really understand why you think so highly of him. Shilian grinned. Function, did you know, there are so many people in this world that are nothing but rocks in my eyes. Function didn't understand. Shilian walked with his hands clasped behind his back. There are rocks everywhere, but precious jades are hard to come by. When it comes to martial arts, I've only ever seen two people who could be called Jades. One is you, the other is him. He suddenly stopped and turned his head, eyes bright. I genuinely think that Mu Ching is extremely gifted. How could I let such a precious jade be left to collect dust, denied from showing its beauty simply because of its background and temper? Shilian looked determined. No, I think that's wrong. You asked why I think so highly of him? It's the same reason I think so highly of you. Those who are destined to shine, I must let them shine. Besides, I don't believe that goodwill brings bad returns. Feng Shen stopped too. After listening to Shilian's speech, he scratched his head. As long as you know what you want, how you go about it is your business. Right? So, where did Mu Ching run off to? Shilian asked. Just then, another couple of young trainees approached them, baskets in their hands, horsing around. When they saw Shilian, they called out to him in chorus, their voices happy. Your Highness! Shilian responded with a smile too. The trainees came up to them and thrust their baskets before the pair, saying happily, Will your Highness have some cherries? They've already been washed in the springs, very clean and very sweet. The baskets were full of small round cherries, vivid red and looking quite adorable. Shilian and Feng Shen picked out a few to eat, and they were indeed juicy and sweet. One of the young trainees asked, When we walked over, we faintly heard your Highness talking about Mu Ching. Are you looking for him? I thought we saw him when we were passing through the cherry wood. Is that right? Thanks for letting me know, Shilian said. Thus the two hurried to the cherry wood. Atop Mount Taisong, other than the abundant wild maples, there were also numerous fruit trees, peaches, pears, oranges, and many others, including cherries. The fruit trees were nourished by springs, bathed in the mountain's mist and sunny dew, and bore fruits filled with spiritual energy. After offering a portion as tribute to the palace, the rest were reserved for the disciples in the temple, who would munch on them after a hard day's work. But outside the royal holy temple, it would be hard to buy even a single one with 100 gold pieces. The cherry trees stood in many neat rows, and within the fresh new leaves drooped dozens of cherries like red coral beads, looking delightfully enticing. Shilian and Feng Shen walked for a while, searching for Mu Ching in the woods, but soon after, they heard quarreling voices coming from just ahead of where they were, and they automatically slowed down to a stop. Hold on, let me drink. How's the butthole coming? Sorry.
How is the butthole coming? Well, actually, the butthole doesn't come.
Whoa. You're so wise.
I'm busy drying Lon Chan's hair.
Okay. Ahead of them stood 4 or 5 white-robed trainees, each with a basket in hand, appearing to have come to pick fruit. However, they weren't circling any fruit trees, but rather a person. Even from afar, their hearing was keen enough that they could clearly hear the particulars of the quarrel. One of the young men said, No wonder there's seemed to be less fruit in the woods lately, so someone's been squatting here and stealing it. A soft voice replied, The fruit growing on Mount Taisong can be picked by any disciple at the temple. So how is it stealing? Besides, there are hundreds, thousands of fruit trees here. There's no way there's less fruit by my power alone. The voice belonged to Mu Ching. From the sleeve corner that could be seen through the crowd, it seemed he had already taken off the black demon costume and changed back into his usual plain training outfit. The trainee humped. Of course, if you were only picking fruit for yourself, there wouldn't be noticeably less, but you don't just pick for yourself, do you? You sneak them down the mountain for other people, exploiting your benefits. How shameless. Shilian understood now. The trainees, who couldn't stand Mu Ching, were picking on him again. Mu Ching came from a very poor family. His mother, who lived in the city at the foot of the mountain, led a meager life. In the past, she had made little money from occasional seamstress work, but after her eyes deteriorated, she could no longer even do that. She had to wait for Mu Ching to bring home the money he earned running errands on the mountain. Sometimes, he would pick some fresh fruit from Mount Taisong for her to try. It wasn't anything major, since there weren't any rules against it, but when said out loud, it still sounded dishonorable. To publicly mock him over it, like this, was even more embarrassing. Mu Ching's voice was chilly. Zhu Zhishang. We rarely speak, but you pick on me again and again. Yesterday, you wouldn't let me through the Xishang Palace to pass on my message. How have I offended you? The young man named Zhu was indeed the trainee who had guarded the door to the Xishang Palace when he heard the incident from the day before mentioned. His anger flared. You're the one who carelessly messed up your job and almost botched that event, so why are you blaming me? You should blame yourself for acting all secretive and making people think you're up to no good. If you had just said outright what you were doing, nothing would have happened. Thanks to you, His Highness almost messed up his important duties, and I got yelled at by the state preceptor. As he griped, he threw the basket on the ground and motioned for everyone to surround and attack. Shilian couldn't watch anymore and shouted, "Stop!" The trainees were all shocked at the sound of his voice. They turned their head and called out, "Your Highness!" Shilian and Feng Shin approached. By then, Shu Shishang had already grabbed Mu Qing by the collar and pushed him against the trunk of a tree, though the brawl had not started. If they really did fight, Mu Qing would have gained the upper hand, even 1 against 20. Nevertheless, if he wanted to stay at the royal holy temple, he knew he must never raise his fist. Shilian smiled. "What's everyone doing?" Shu Shishang was a decent, plain-looking young man who looked up to the crown prince. Hearing Shilian's inquiry, he froze and quickly let go of Mu Qing. We were. Shilian continued to smile. "Although I don't know why everyone is quarreling, Mu Qing is my personal attendant. Anything he does is generally under my command. I didn't realize offense would be taken if I had him pick some fruit for me." The trainees all bowed. "No, no, so it was His Highness who asked him to come. We misunderstood." On the side, Mu Qing leaned against the tree, at first taken aback to hear Shilian said he'd come under His Highness's command. He quickly fixed his collar, lowered his head, and didn't speak. Cold sweat was rolling down the backs of the trainees as they profoundly apologized to Shilian, then to Mu Qing, and finally picked up their baskets and hurried away, escaping the cherry wood. Shilian saw the basket Mu Qing had brought on the ground and bent to pick it up, passing it to him. "Want some help?" Mu Qing didn't take the basket, but he raised his head and watched Shilian with an unreadable expression for a moment before he spoke. "Your Highness." "What is it?" Shilian asked. "Why must you always show up at times like these?" Shilian only made a sound of confusion, but Feng Shin grew upset. "What do you mean? Is it wrong to come and save you?" Mu Qing cast him a glance and took the basket. Just then, Feng Shin stiffened his neck and said rigidly, "Listen up. What happened before was my fault. I didn't mean to accuse you of anything. I just made some offhand comments. There's no need for you to overthink it or suspect anything. I don't care for anyone other than His Highness, and I'm not interested in gossip. That's all I have to say, so stop being so difficult." Pfft. At first, Shilian thought his tone was too aggressive, but towards the end it became strangely funny. Mu Qing glared at Feng Shin, and Shilian waved his hand. All right. Everything Feng Shin said is true. Let's just forget what happened. Nothing's happened." A moment later, Mu Qing said begrudgingly, "I'll look for that red coiled pearl again later. Maybe it was dropped on the street." Shilian thought it might be a bad idea to appear that he didn't care, so he replied, "All right, if you have the time, then thank you. But if it was dropped in the streets, somebody will have picked it up by now." It seemed Mu Qing had nothing more to say, so he collected the bunches of cherries that had fallen on the ground and put them back in his basket. He hadn't picked that many in the first place. As he moved to leave the woods, Shilian saw many more enticing fresh cherries and casually picked a bunch, dropping them into his basket. Mu Qing was slightly taken aback. Shilian said, "Next time you want to pick fruit for your mother, just say you're picking them by my command, and no one will say anything. The state preceptor told me to return to the palace for a few days, so I plan on leaving tomorrow. Why don't you make a trip down the mountain too? Let's head back for today." It took a while, but at last Mu Qing muttered in a quiet voice, "Thank you, Your Highness." The next day, Shilian descended the mountain with Feng Shin and Mu Qing in tow. The moment they reached the foot of the mountain, they saw a shining golden carriage right outside the huge mountain gates. A young man dressed in a collared brocade top with a whip in hand was lying in the front seat of the carriage. His legs were crossed, and he looked smug and important. The second he saw Shilian exiting the gates, he leapt to his feet and ran towards him in a mad dash, shouting in obvious joy, "Cousin Crown Prince!" This youth was of course Qi Rong. Only he would have the free time to wait aimlessly for Shilian at the foot of Mount Taisang. He skipped over and happily exclaimed, My patience has finally paid off." Shilian grinned and ruffled his hair, laughing. "Did Qi Rong grow taller again? How did you know I was returning to the palace today?" Qi Rong giggled. "I didn't. I just waited and knew you'd have to come down sooner or later. I refused to believe I couldn't catch you." "Free, aren't you?" Shilian said helplessly. "Are you studying properly? What about sword practice?" If Mother asks me to check your studies again, I won't make excuses for you. Chi-Rong blinked, his eyes shifty, and suddenly he jumped up and down. Never mind all that! Look at my new carriage! Cousin Crown Prince, come inside, ride my carriage back to the palace! He grabbed Shilian's hand and pulled him to the carriage, but Shilian could sense danger. You're driving? Function and Mooching approached too. Technically, servants should sit at the front, but Chi-Rong's face fell immediately, and he cracked the whip in his hand. I asked the cousin crown prince to get on, but I didn't invite you two. You think I'll let lowlifes touch my golden carriage? Get the hell out of here! Shilian quietly snapped, Chi-Rong! Function had met Chi-Rong many times before, and already knew his foul mouth and vulgar condescending attitude. But Mooching had never entered the palace before, and so had naturally never gotten the chance to meet Prince Xiaojing. Chi-Rong was feeling extremely aggrieved, but seeing Shilian about to walk away, he painfully and begrudgingly condescended to let the two shitty lowlives board his precious golden carriage. I need water.
You have a hard time on his fucking face right now.
I understand. I need a cough drop. Ricola. Okay. However, as soon as they entered the carriage, all three of them immediately regretted their decision. Chi-Rong drove like a madman, whip in his hand, lashing non-stop, screaming who knows what. The white horse shrieked in shock, and they thrashed down the streets with wheels spinning frantically. Chi-Rong refused to stop no matter how much Shilian screamed for him to do so. They almost crashed into a number of pedestrians and stalls, and it was thanks only to Function and Mooching, who sat at the front and grabbed the reins to guide the horse, that the berserk journey did not cost at least 20 lives. When they finally reached the palace and the carriage slowed down, Shilian, Function, and Mooching all breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Shilian wiped away his cold sweat. The other two had been lashed by Chi-Rong's whip a number of times, and their hands were covered in welts.
Oh my god.
He's a little silly. Chi-Rong rose to his feet, one leg stepping on the white horse's behind. He proclaimed proudly, What do you think, cousin Crown Prince? I drive pretty well, right? Shilian dismounted the carriage and replied, I'm going to tell father and mother to confiscate your carriage. What? Chi-Rong cried in shock. Regarding Shenle culture, first, they loved gold. Second, they loved precious stones. Third, they loved beauties. Fourth, they loved music. And fifth, they loved art. The palace of Shenle was thus the most distinguished palace, where all that they loved coalesced. Traversing the large courtyard, walking down the crimson hallway, not everything was gilded or built of jade. There were also masterpiece paintings hung all around, for example, and soft music wafted in the air. It created the illusion of paradise. The palace was Shilian's home, the place he grew up. Function was chosen to be his personal guard at the age of 14, and had long since gotten used to these sights. However, it was Mooching's first time seeing such a building, and he couldn't help but be awed. Yet the more awed he was, the more careful he became, and the more he didn't dare to allow others to sense what he was feeling, didn't dare to take a wrong step. Shilian went to meet with the queen straight away. She was resting at Chi-Feng Palace, leaning on a small tea table and tasting new brews. She had already received the message that the crown prince had returned, and with eyes crescent-shaped in joy, she extended both arms before her son had eventually come near. She said, Finally willing to come home and see your mom? Function and Mooching stood guard outside. Shilian entered the chamber with Chi-Rong in tow, and he reached out to take his mother's hands when he approached. Didn't I just visit 2 months ago? The queen grumbled. What a heartless child. Even Wronger knows to keep an old woman like me company, but here you are, sounding all self-righteous when you haven't come home in 2 months. Shilian chuckled. And how is mother old? You look no older than a teenager. It's like we're of the same generation. The queen was very pleased, hearing these words of praise, even if she had a son as old as Shilian, because of her status and wealth as a member of the noble Min clan, and the wife of the king of Shenle. She was very well maintained, and still looked the part of noble beauty. Still, the word that left her lips was a light admonishment. Flatterer. Julien glanced at the small tea table and saw a jaded cup, its contents emitting a strange fragrance. He curiously asked, "What is this?" as he picked it up. But the queen warned, "Don't drink it. That's not something you should drink." Julien was curious. "Why can't I drink this?" The queen reached for the small jaded cup and took it from him, poured a bit of its contents on her handkerchief, and pressed it gently to her face a few times. Mount Tai Song recently sent a batch of fresh fruit. I don't like cherries, but there's a method of making them into paste for facials, so I squeezed some for fun. There's not much use for it, and I was about to have it thrown out, so you can't possibly drink it. Julien smiled as he listened, but suddenly recalled the events of the previous day. There were very few times in a year where Mooching's mother could taste cherries, and Mooching himself was bullied just for trying to pick some. It was something of a sensitive topic, and Julien was afraid Mooching would be uncomfortable listening to it, so he smiled and changed the subject. "Then, do you have anything that I could eat?" The queen chuckled. "The way you make it sound, people will think I starve you. But you've been a picky eater ever since you were young. I can't plump you up. You've gotten so thin since you went to the mountain. Today you'll eat whatever I tell you to, with no fussing." Mother and son conversed for a while, and the queen asked about the incident during the heavenly procession with great concern. "By the state preceptor's report, it sounds serious. What's going to happen? Will you be punished?" Julien didn't have the chance to answer before Chi-Rong cut in. "Humph! That wasn't Crown Prince's fault. That wasn't Cousin Crown Prince's fault. He wasn't the one who fell off the wall. If anyone must be punished, it should be that little non-croaker." What the heck is a little non-croaker? Julien thought. Before he could correct Chi-Rong, however, the queen simply laughed. Then she happened to notice the two outside the manor and asked, "Who's the child next to Feng Xin? It's the first time I've seen another person by your side." Julien replied cheerfully, "That's Mooching. He's the one who played the demon on stage yesterday." Hearing this, anger flashed across Chi-Rong's face. The queen said, "Really? Have him come in so I can see his face. Feng Xin can come in too." Thus Feng Xin and Mooching entered the chamber and knelt before the queen. She took her time looking over Mooching and said to Julien, "I thought he fought rather well yesterday. A fairly respectable child. Looking at his face, you'd think he'd be a gentle minister. No one would suspect he could be so tenacious wielding a saber." Julien grinned. "Right? I think he's quite good, too." Chi-Rong, on the other hand, commented coolly, "Oh, the demon yesterday was him?" Julien heard his tone and felt dread. Sure enough, the next second, Chi-Rong suddenly exploded. He snatched the small jaded cup from the little tea table and swung it right at Mooching's face. "Here, your reward!" Fortunately, Julien was faster. He smacked Chi-Rong's hand, forcing him to drop the cup so the splash didn't make it to Mooching's face. Julien pulled him back by the collar. "Chi-Rong, what are you doing?" Even as he was seized, Chi-Rong still ranted and raved. "Cousin, I'm helping you discipline an impudent servant. Before you showed up yesterday, he sure was enjoying himself, hogging the limelight. Who do you think you are? The star of the heavenly procession? Gonna overthrow the heavens too?" The queen was...
How old is he right now?
He's like 15. He's like 14, 15.
Little shit.
He's such a little shit. The queen was stunned. "Wronger, what are you doing?" Mooching's face was spared the splash, but his clothes weren't. Because the queen hadn't given him leave to do otherwise, he stayed kneeling on the floor, his face ghastly pale and gloomy. Julien passed Chi-Rong to Feng Xin. "Don't let him hit anyone." Feng Xin only used one hand to restrain Chi-Rong, but Chi-Rong kicked and punched, spitting as he shouted, "Who do you think you are to have the damned nerve to touch me so casually?" Julien could feel his head throbbing. "Chi-Rong, you're getting more and more out of control." He then turned to the queen. "Mother, I forgot to mention something. Please confiscate his golden carriage." Shocked, Chi-Rong yelled, "No, no! Why? That's Yimo's birthday gift to me." "Even if it is, it must be confiscated," Julien said. "We almost caused a disturbance in the streets. You best not touch it again until you learn how to drive properly." The queen made a noise of surprise and asked, "Disturbance? What disturbance?" Julien recounted the crazy saga of Chi-Rong's driving. Chi-Rong was furious, his eyes rimmed in red. "Cousin Crown Prince is wrong! I didn't run over a single person!" Julien didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That's because we stopped you." Chi-Rong struggled out of Feng Xin's hands and ran out of Chi Feng Palace in a mad fit, not turning back even when the queen called out to him.
She said helplessly, "I'll talk to him tomorrow about confiscating his carriage." She sighed. That child has wanted a carriage for the longest time, so when his birthday came around and he still desperately wanted it, I gave it to him. Who knew it would turn out like this? If I had known, I wouldn't have done it. Why must he have a carriage? Shilian wondered. He said it's so he can go to Mount Taisong any time and bring you back to the palace, the queen replied. Shilian fell silent, learning at the end of the day it was a gesture of goodwill. After a moment, he spoke. It'd be better instead to find him a good teacher and restrain that temper. He can't keep going on like this. The queen sighed. And what teacher can restrain him? He only ever listens to you, and we could hardly have him go to the mountain to cultivate with you. The state preceptor would die before taking him on as a disciple. Shilian found the idea both hilarious and horrifying. He shook his head. With a temper like that, if he entered the royal holy temple, he would cause havoc for sure. Both mother and son were deeply troubled by this, but they didn't have any ideas, so they let it go for the time being. That evening, after having seen his parents and caught up, Jillian rose to leave the palace. It was a well-known fact that the crown prince was obsessed with cultivation, and ever since he entered the royal holy temple, he visited his parents less and less. The king didn't comment much on the matter, but the queen was always reluctant to see him go. After leaving the palace, Shilian casually strolled around the imperial capital, accompanied by Mu Qing, to visit his home as he'd suggested the day before. The tall, opulent red gates and the impoverished slums were only a street away from each other. Mu Qing's former home was tucked into a dark alley, off the most bustling area of the imperial capital. The three of them had just turned into the alley when 5 or 6 children in rags surrounded them. "Gaga! Gaga is back!" Shilian was a little confused at first, wondering why they would call a stranger Gaga. But then he discovered that the Gaga they were calling to wasn't him, but rather Mu Qing. The children called out to him sweetly, but Mu Qing ignored them. "There's nothing this time. Don't Gaga me so easily." His face was wooden, but his voice wasn't cold. He turned to Shilian. "Don't mind them, Your Highness. They're just kids from the block." Still, this group of children obviously knew him well, so they were clearly used to playing with him and weren't scared at all. They giggled and surrounded them, their dirty little hands extended, begging for treats from Mu Qing. In the end, Mu Qing reached for the gem-like red cherries in his bag and handed them out. Feng Xin was astonished at this sight, as if Mu Qing doing anything like this was nothing short of a miracle. It was no wonder, since Mu Qing's pretty boy face always looked extremely selfish and cold-hearted. He seemed like the type that, seeing someone die from starvation on the streets, would still keep a tight grip on his own food. Shilian, on the other hand, wasn't surprised at all. At first he also wanted to find something to give to the children, but he didn't usually carry sweets on his person, and having Feng Xin give coins would be too much like dismissing beggars, so Shilian didn't think it would be appropriate. Suddenly there was a boom, and a cacophony of galloping noises from the main street, the long shrieking whinny of a horse, and people screaming. The three of them stopped. Then Shilian rushed out of the alley. The main street was in chaos, stalls toppled, and people on the ground. It was total confusion. The pedestrians were all fleeing. Red apples and yellow pears rolled all over the ground. But before he could figure out what happened, he heard the crazed laughter of a young man. "Out of my way! Get out of my way! If you're that blind, I don't care if you get trampled." Feng Xin swore. "It's Chi Rong again." Sure enough, Chi Rong stood atop his magnificent golden carriage, looking malicious. He was lashing his whip wildly, the white horse howling from the strikes. "Stop him!" Shilian shouted. The golden carriage whooshed by them, and Feng Xin acknowledged with an "understood" before charging ahead. Shilian was about to go check for any wounded among all the toppled stalls and knocked over pedestrians left in the wake of Chirong's mad ride, when suddenly he noticed something wrong. He whipped his head around and saw that there was something being dragged along behind the golden carriage, attached with a long, thick hemp rope. At the end of the rope was a large sack that appeared to have something struggling inside. It looked like there was a person in that sack. At that moment, Shilian could only feel his blood run cold. The next second, he rushed forward. From all the whipping, that white horse was galloping like it was running for its life, furiously spinning the wheels of the carriage. Feng Xin was trying to hold the horse back, but probably wouldn't be able to stop it immediately. Shilian raced up to the carriage in only a few steps, unsheathed his sword, and struck down. The rope snapped in two, and the sack dropped to the ground, rolled, and came to a stop. Julien bent forward to inspect it. The sack had been dragged for who knows how long, and it was torn from the scraping. It was extremely dirty and drenched in blood. It looked like a bag for a dead body. Another swing from his sword, and the rope tied around the opening was cut. He opened the bag, and there was indeed someone inside. What's more, it was a young child. Julien ripped open the entire sack. The child within was curled into a ball, hugging his head tightly. His filthy clothes were covered in giant footprints and fresh blood. His hair was matted with blood. He was a mess, and it was obvious that he had been severely beaten, so badly that he didn't look human anymore. Judging by his size, he was only 7 or 8, and a tiny creature. He was shaking like a layer of his skin had been forcibly peeled off. Truly incredible that he was still alive after such a violent beating and being dragged through the streets. Julien reached out a hand to feel his neck and found that his pulse wasn't too weak. He sighed a breath of relief. He immediately picked up the small body, then turned around and barked a furious order. Funshin, arrest Qi-Rong. He could not believe that something like this could happen in the kingdom of Shunle. Under the light of day, on the main street, a member of the nobility stuffed a live human in a sack to be dragged behind a horse carriage. If he hadn't seen and stopped it, this small child would have been dragged to death this day. From some distance away came the sounds of whinnying and the angry roars of Qi-Rong, and soon after Fengshen yelled back, "He's been stopped." Julien rushed towards them just in time to hear Qi-Rong howl in rage. "You damned audacious lowly servant! You dare hurt me! Who gave you the balls?" Turned out, Fengshen couldn't stop the horse, so he tried to snatch the reins instead. Of course, Qi-Rong wouldn't let him, so the two pulled back and forth, and in a moment of carelessness, Fengshen bumped him and pushed him off the carriage. Qi-Rong fell to the ground and rolled a few times, scraping his knees. Seeing that he was surrounded by onlookers, he felt nothing but rage and embarrassment. However, Julien cut in. "I did." Qi-Rong opened and closed his mouth a couple of times before finally crying, "Cousin Crown Prince!" Julien said angrily, "Look at what you've done, Qi-Rong. Just then, he felt the child in his arms jerk. He had loosened the hands hugging his head and was peeking up at Julien from the gap between his elbows. Julien immediately restrained his anger and lowered his voice to soothe him in a gentle voice. "How do you feel? Do you feel pain anywhere especially?" The child was amazingly still alert, but not unconscious from the pain, nor frozen in shock. He shook his head. Julien noticed that what little of his face was visible was bleeding, and he was about to check for other head injuries, but the child firmly clutched half of his face with his hands, stubbornly refusing to show him. Julien coaxed, "Don't be afraid. Everything's fine. I only want to check your injuries." The child, however, pressed his hands down harder, revealing only one large obsidian eye, looking panicked. But this panic didn't seem like it stemmed from a fear that he would get beaten, but rather that something would be discovered. Looking at this little face, half covered, with only one eye to be seen, Julien suddenly realized he might have seen this child somewhere. He squinted at the thought. Qi-Rong saw his upset face and explained, "Cousin Crown Prince, that little non-croaker ruined your grand ceremony yesterday, so I avenged you."
My God.
"Don't worry, I was careful. He won't die." Sure enough, the child held in his arms was the one who fell from the city wall during the Shengyuan heavenly ceremonial procession the day before. No wonder Julien thought he looked familiar. This little child hadn't even changed. He was still wearing the same outfit as the day before, but because of all the beating and dragging, he was filthier, and the clothes looked nothing like they had yesterday. He didn't even look like the same person. Julien couldn't hold back his anger anymore. "Who told you to avenge me? It has nothing to do with this child. It wasn't his fault." Qi-Rong justified. "Of course it's his fault. If not for you, you wouldn't have been scolded by the state preceptor." This ruckus was getting out of hand, and the crowd watching was growing. The onlookers whispered to each other. Just then Muqing approached, and Qi-Rong pointed his whip at him, expression laced with hostility. "And you lowly servant, I can tell this one doesn't know his place just from the look of him. If you don't discipline him sooner or later, he's going to overthrow you and step on you, his master. I helped you discipline him, but you turned around and defended him instead, and told me on too. Now Yifu and Yimo are not only ignoring that I did it for you, they're even going to confiscate my golden carriage. Cousin, that was my birthday gift. I've wanted it for over 2 years. Mu Ching gave Qi-Rong an unreadable, sweeping look. Shilian laughed from the sheer rage. I don't need your help. Not like this. Are you really avenging me, or are you avenging yourself? Cousin, why would you say that to me? Qi-Rong asked, confused. What have I done wrong in being on your side? Shilian couldn't talk sense into him. Qi-Rong, listen here. From now on, you're not allowed to touch this child. Not even a finger. Do you hear me? Just then, Shilian felt a pull on his neck. He was wrapped up in a fit of anger, so it startled him. He looked down and saw that the young child had buried his face in his chest, his arms tightly encircled around Shilian's neck. Shilian felt him shake uncontrollably and thought he was in pain. He asked hurriedly, "What's wrong?" The child was covered all over in mud, grime, and blood, filthy and unkempt. It all smeared onto Shilian's white robe, but Shilian didn't mind at all. He gently patted the child's back to comfort him and soothed him in a low voice. I'll take you to the doctor's right now. The child didn't respond, but he hugged Shilian even tighter. He held on with a death grip and wouldn't let go, as if he was holding on to a lifeline. Qi-Rong could see that Shilian wasn't going to acknowledge his goodwill, his heart solely with outsiders. And when he saw that kid bullying Shilian's robes with bloody, muddy smears, his anger flared. He raised the whip to lash the back of the child's head. Function.
God, dude.
Yeah, it's crazy. Function was standing to the side, and in a split second, his leg flew out and kicked Qi-Rong right on the arm. There was a loud crack, and Qi-Rong screamed. The whip fell to the ground, and his right arm dropped limply at an abnormal angle. He stood there frozen in disbelief, and it was a while before he slowly raised his head, glaring at Function, enunciating each word. You dare break my arm! The words chilled them to the bone. It was only after he kicked that Function realized what he had done, and his face changed. But Mu Ching's face changed even more. It was one thing for them to detest Qi-Rong behind his back, but for a personal guard to transgress this badly and accidentally break the arm of royalty, that was something completely different. Shilian had his hands full with that child when it happened, and the path behind him was packed with onlookers. Dodging the blow wouldn't be easy, but he would have managed it fine given the chance. But Qi-Rong had come at him with such aggression and so little warning that Function moved too fast without thinking, and Shilian didn't have the chance to stop him. Now everything was in even more of an uproar, and Shilian didn't have time to think. His clothes were getting soaked with blood. If they delayed any longer, the child might die right there. Shilian made a split-second decision, inhaled deeply, and shouted in a clear voice, "Everyone, if you were pulled into this incident today, please record any damages or losses. I will take all responsibility without fail." Then he turned to Function and Mu Ching. "I need to save the child first. Take Qi-Rong away, and don't let him cause any more havoc outside." Done with his instructions, Shilian ran towards the palace with the child in his arms. Function heard the command, his expression back to normal, and he picked up the raging Qi-Rong before following Shilian. The soldiers guarding the palace gates thought it was strange to see the Crown Prince racing back, having left such a short while ago, but of course they didn't dare obstruct him. Thus Shilian ran straight for the Imperial Medical Office and made Function and Mu Ching wait outside the door, with Qi-Rong under arrest, while he entered the infirmary alone. The Crown Prince rarely returned to the palace and rarely gave orders, so the imperial doctors naturally rushed over with due haste. Shilian placed the young child in a chair and said, "Thanks in advance, everyone. This child was beaten by several adults, stuffed in a sack, and dragged through the streets. Please check if there are any head injuries first. That's the most important thing." Neither royal nor noble had ever brought in a wild, dirty babe for them to heal before, but the imperial medical team also knew they needed to do whatever they were told to, and they acknowledged Shilian's direction with a chorus of, "Yes, yes, yes." One of them said, "Put your hands down first, little one." Although the child had been docile in Shilian's arms up until now, he started struggling when they firmly covered the right side of his face, refusing to drop his hands. No matter how competent the imperial doctors were, if the patient would not cooperate, there was nothing they could do. The doctors looked to Shilian. "Your Highness, how..." Shilian raised a hand. He's probably afraid of strangers. It's fine. Let me. The child was sitting in a chair, and Shilian couldn't be level with his eyes, so he bent forward and tilted his head. What's your name? The child's large eyes stared at him intently, his obsidian black pupil reflecting a snow-white silhouette. This gaze, if it must be described, was exactly as Feng Xin had said, possessed by the devil. It shouldn't be the gaze of a child. It was a while before the child bowed his head. Hong. His voice was tiny and soft, a little mumbled. It was like he didn't want to tell, or that he was slightly embarrassed. Shilian only sort of heard the word Hong, the color red, then asked another question. How old are you? 10, the child replied. Shilian was only asking offhand, hoping to lower his guard, but hearing the child's shy response of 10, he was taken aback. I thought he was only 7 or 8, but he's 10? This child is extremely malnourished and emaciated. After a pause, Shilian smiled softly. The doctors will see to your wounds now. Don't be afraid and lower your hands, okay? That child heard, but hesitantly shook his head. Why not? Shilian asked. He was silent for a long time before replying, Ugly. His response was just that one word, and no matter how Shilian coaxed, he refused to remove his hands. Shilian promised that he wouldn't think him ugly, that he wouldn't look, but not even turning around would do the trick. What obstinance at such a young age! Without much choice, the imperial doctors could only ask him a few questions, have him recognize a number of fingers, make sure he didn't feel faint or have any headaches, check that he was perfectly conscious of what he saw and what he thought, and attend to his physical wounds. As the imperial doctors worked, they all appeared confused, clicking their tongues in awe. Shilian stood guard on the side, and hearing their sounds of wonder, he asked, How is he, everyone? One of the imperial doctors asked, in spite of himself, Your Highness, did this child really get beaten and dragged along the roads in a sack? Shilian was speechless for a second. Why would that be false? The imperial doctor replied, If that really is the case, then amazing. I have never seen anyone so tenacious. He has 5 broken ribs and a broken leg, and many other injuries, big and small, but despite all of that, he has remained conscious this entire time, and can even hold a conversation while sitting upright. Even adults would find that difficult, never mind a 10-year-old child. Hearing how severe the injuries were, Shilian inwardly became even more furious at Qirong. He looked at that child, and saw that he was sitting there on this chair as if he felt no pain, stealing glimpses at Shilian with that large obsidian black left eye. When he noticed he'd been caught staring at Shilian, he immediately turned his head away. Seeing this, for some reason, Shilian thought the boy was both silly and pitiful. He asked, Will his injuries heal? One of the imperial doctors wrapped new layers of bandages around the child's head and replied, Not a problem. Only then did Shilian relax. He nodded. Thank you all for your hard work. Just then, an attendant entered to notify them of the imminent arrival of His Majesty the King and Queen. Each of the imperial doctors immediately stood up and exited the imperial medical office to greet them. Shilian moved the child to the bed and said, Lie down and get some rest. It occurred to him that the child was afraid of strangers, and all the people who would be crowding in shortly might scare him, so Shilian lowered the bed curtains before rising to his feet too. A number of guards and attendants escorted the king and queen as they walked into the hall. The queen's face was pale. My dear child, why did you return so suddenly? Why did you return so suddenly when you just left the palace? Were you hurt outside? Please be at ease, mother, Shilian said. I wasn't hurt. It was someone else who was injured. Just then, Qirong cried out from the corner, Yimu, save me! Only then did the queen notice Qirong to the side, firmly held by Feng Xin and under arrest, and she was shocked. She was focused on the well-being of her son and had completely ignored everything else. But now that she saw, she asked, Wronger, what happened? The king, on the other hand, knitted his brows slightly. Feng Xin, why are you holding Prince Xiaojing like a criminal? When His Majesty arrived, Feng Xin should have bowed in greeting, like Bu Qing and all the others, but because he had Qirong in hand and couldn't release him, he was put in an awkward situation. Shilian spoke up. It was under my command. Qirong held up his right arm. Yimu, my arm is broken. The queen hadn't had the chance to sympathize before Shilian cut in harshly. You broke an arm, but what about that child? What child? The king asked. A 10-year-old child, Shilian answered. Powerless, vulnerable, and frail in stature. Qi sent his subordinates to beat him. If not for the child's tenacity, he would have been beaten to death on the spot. Qi looked as if he had just heard a joke, his eyes widening. A powerless, vulnerable 10-year-old child? Frail? Cousin, you don't know just how vicious, how savage, how spunky that little non-croaker was. He only pretends to be pathetic in front of you. I called for 5 or 6 guys, and they still couldn't catch the brat. He thrashed and bit them until they were bloodied all over. If he hadn't angered me so, why else would I have dragged him behind my horse carriage? Hearing this, both the king and queen's faces fell. Shilian drew in a deep breath and shouted, "Enough! Do you think what you've done is impressive?" Qi wasn't one to shy away from the limelight. He was so arrogant and ostentatious that there was no way the citizens of the capital hadn't seen him. And after they saw, there was no reason he wouldn't become the talk of every dinner table conversation in the city. The king gave the queen a look, appearing a little grim. "Take Prince Zhaojing away. Doctor, see to his arm. The golden carriage will be permanently confiscated. You will be confined to your palace and reflect on your actions for a month without release." The guard behind him immediately acknowledged the order and moved forward to take Qi. Only then did Feng Xin let go. Qi, however, no longer cared and humphed. Take it, take it. I already knew today that it would be my last chance to drive it." The queen sighed sadly, hearing that he had no remorse or repenting heart. Shilian spoke up. It would seem that only a month of detention to reflect. It would seem that with only a month of detention to reflect, he will still do this again. There needs to be stricter discipline. Qi was taken aback and stammered angrily, "Cousin Crown Prince, you—" But then he switched gears. "Fine, I admit it. This time it was my fault. No matter how His Majesty punishes me, Qi has no complaints." His next words changed the argument's direction. "But shouldn't Cousin Crown Prince's servant also be punished? Yifu, Yimu, my arm was broken by that Feng Xin, you know." Hearing this, the king instantly shifted his gaze to Feng Xin, looking outraged. Feng Xin bowed his head, and Mu Qing imperceptibly shuffled 2 steps away. The king berated him coldly. "Feng Xin, you are the Crown Prince's bodyguard. The Crown Prince treats you well and regards you highly. But have you forgotten your place? What is this arrogance? Your duty is to serve His Highness. Is this how you serve him? You dare raise a hand against the Crown Prince's cousin, Prince Zhaojing?" At those words, Feng Xin was ready to kneel, but Shilian stopped him. No need to kneel. Feng Xin obeyed Shilian's commands first and foremost. Even under the king's orders, his priority was His Highness, and so he instantly straightened again. Seeing this, the king grew even more displeased. It's true that Feng Xin broke Qi arm, but the reason was to protect his master, Shilian said. Besides, Qi was at fault first, so not Feng Xin, so why must he kneel? "It doesn't matter," the king said. "Either way, he has offended Prince Zhaojing. There's a difference between masters and servants, a distinction of superior versus inferior. If I, the king, were to make him kneel, or even if I punished him with 100 lashes, there would be nothing inappropriate about it." Although the king wasn't as affectionate towards Qi as the queen was, Qi was still nevertheless a part of the royal household. He was never to be disobeyed or offended. Qi knew this very well, and said with a sidelong glance, "No need for a flogging punishment. He belongs to the cousin Crown Prince. I don't want to make things difficult. As long as he breaks his own arm and kowtows before me 3 times, I can let this go." The king nodded slowly to accept the decision. However, Shilian interjected, "If you must punish Feng Xin, then you must punish me first. He's my servant. First of all, he's done nothing wrong, and second of all, if he was at fault, it was still done under my orders. I will take punishment on his behalf." Hearing him, rage flashed across the king's face. By and large, all fathers and sons in the world must go through this change. When the son is young, he idolizes his father as the greatest hero on earth, his own personal role model, and his worship is clear. However, when the son matures to a certain age, he starts to question everything his father does. This can even brew revulsion until, in the end, neither side will acknowledge the other. Julian's fundamental objective for entering Mount Taisong was to improve his martial arts and search for the direction of his heart. However, he was never attached to a particular place where he was trained, nor his identity. The so-called Tao of cultivation meant exactly what it said, to walk the path. As long as one's heart was set on the path with a singular mind, then training could be done anywhere. He didn't need to follow any dictated norms, nor enter the royal holy temple. But there was another reason why Shilian had begged and pestered them to let him train on Mount Taisong, and that was because he didn't really get along with his father. As the esteemed crown prince of Shenle, the moment Shilian was born, the kingdom of Shenle had already drawn out every detail of the path of his life, neat and orderly. It was all right when he was still young. A child had few worries, and Shilian only needed his parents to build gold foil palaces with him, to frolic and play. As the years went by, Shilian saw more and more that his father wasn't only a father, but also the ruler of a kingdom, and many of their beliefs and actions no longer agreed. For example, the so-called royal authority was one of the things Shilian loathed. If they couldn't agree, then it was best to stay far away. Every time he returned to the palace, he spent time conversing merrily with his mother, but he never had any hearts-to-hearts with his father. Neither of the two ever took the initiative to talk to each other, and it was the queen who always mediated between them. Father and son had maintained the stalemate for many months, and now Shilian stubbornly refused to back down. The king said, "Very well, take his place if you must. Let's see if you can actually withstand it." "Of course I can," Shilian retorted. The queen saw the two of them butting heads again, and anxiously intervened. Why must it be like this? Just then, Feng Xin, who hadn't spoken a word, suddenly raised his left arm and struck down on his right. There was a loud crack. The crowd was startled, and looked towards the sound, and saw that his right arm was drooping limply, exactly like Qi-Rong's. Shilian was both shocked and furious. "Feng Xin!" Cold sweat rolled down Feng Xin's forehead, and without a word, he knelt down before Qi-Rong and kowtowed 3 times before Shilian could stop him. Quite pleased, Qi-Rong laughed out loud. "All right, I guess I forgive you. Why couldn't you have done this earlier?" Even though Qi-Rong's arm was also broken, he looked energized and refreshed when he left, as if he had just won a battle. As for Feng Xin, he was still kneeling on the ground. Wu Qing stood on the sidelines watching, looking vaguely ashen, but his thoughts were otherwise unreadable. Shilian whipped around to face his father, yelling angrily, "You!" Feng Xin grabbed him with his left arm. "Your Highness." The queen also put her hands on him to pull him back. Feng Xin had followed Shilian since the age of 14, and Shilian knew he was given preferential treatment by the queen. Feng Xin had only done this because he couldn't bear to see the queen sad over the dispute between father and son. If Shilian threw a fit now, then Feng Xin's efforts would go to waste. He swallowed his outrage, but the fire continued to burn inside of his heart. The king finally looked appeased and left with a grim expression. The queen had always liked Feng Xin. She smiled. "My child, we've wronged you." "Please don't say that, your majesty. This was my duty," Feng Xin replied. Hearing this, Wu Qing's eyes flickered, and he seemed to sneer soundlessly. Shilian, however, closed his eyes. "Mother, if you really can't handle Qi-Rong, lock him up." The queen sighed, nodded, then shook her head and left as well. What's the update on Elden Ring here? What is this background?
Oh,
Oh, Sunny's
Sunny's
home.
home now.